There is something in there.
What do you mean?
Is it?
We are in fact, we're on the edge of 1st and 2nd Kings. We've been in a series, and how long? It's been over a year. We've been in this a long time. Because we started in Genesis, and did Genesis, and then we did parts of Exodus and Numbers, the narrative, not the laws. And then we did all of Joshua, we did all of Judges, then we started Samuel, the books of Samuel. We covered both of the books of Samuel. We did the first book. We're in the first book of the Kings. And we're going to move into the second. So we've covered a lot of territory. And you know so much about the Old Testament.
More than I did.
Yeah, that's right. Better than that. So do I. Now, so we've done all this, and what we're looking at the narrative. Because there's a lot of stuff in there, especially in the first 5 books in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We didn't look at Deuteronomy at all. We didn't look at Leviticus at all, because none of that's narrative. It's all law. And we haven't been looking at the whole Bible. Instead, we're looking at the story. And as we look at that story, about whom is the story?
God.
It's the story of God. We might say, well, it's the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It's the story of, Joshua and all the judges, and of Samuel and David and Solomon. All that we could say that, but it's really God. It's God's story.
God's the story.
Yeah, because God's the star. God's the one who drives the story. God is the one that's working with these people. And these are like characters in this broader story. And we have moved through all of that. We are now in Kings. And last week when we were talking about it, about whom have we been focused? Let's say the last 2 weeks, because that'll move us in. We've done David, right? And his son, who was Solomon. Okay, so we've done that. And what happened to the people? Because we're in the land. Solomon, David had this united kingdom. What happened to the kingdom? We divided. So we've got Israel and we've got Judah. And Judah is the one that has Jerusalem in it, right? Which also means it has God in it. Very good, because what else is in Jerusalem?
Temple.
The temple. And according to the writer, that's where God dwells. That's where God dwells. He dwells. That's the house of the Lord. So the temple houses God. Therefore, Israel is always going to be messed up, because they cannot worship God, because God is in another country. And so even though the kings of Israel create their own way to worship God, it can't be in the temple, because that would involve going to sometimes a hostile country to sacrifice for protection. You can't do it in the ancient world. So they developed their own religion up north, but for the writer of Kings, that religion is what?
Idolatry.
Always idolatry, because it is never focused on the God who dwells in Jerusalem in the temple. Okay, and they have other issues. It's not a Davidic dynasty. The sons of David are ruling in Jerusalem and not up north, because it's different. Okay, so we've got this divided kingdom. And last week the focus was not on Judah, the focus was on Israel, right? The northern kingdom. And who was the king we've been looking at for 2 weeks? Ahab. And Ahab's wife is... But you got to say it like Jezebel. Yeah, thank you, Patty. You got to kind of do like this, Jezebel. You got to move your head, Jezebel. So you got it, Patty. You nailed it. Jezebel is his wife, and what's the issue with Ahab and Jezebel living out north? What are they doing that for the writer is always unacceptable? Worshiping other gods. And remember, Jezebel is from Sodom, and Baal is her god, and so of course she gets her husband to worship her god too, and so that's a big issue. And so we've got King Ahab and Jezebel up north, and who is confronting Ahab and Jezebel? Elijah. So we've got sort of the story of Elijah and Ahab and Jezebel. Elijah on one side and Elijah is what? How is Elijah described?
Prophet.
He's a prophet. Yeah, Elijah is described as a prophet from God, which is important because you've got other prophets that aren't from God. Because prophet is more like an advisor or maybe like a preacher. But that's what prophets do. So Elijah's a prophet, and he's been confronting, and in this confrontation, who wins?
God.
God. I'm glad you said God and not Elijah, because God wins. God wins. And sometimes when Elijah says, man, I want to sit under this tree and die because I am sick and tired of this, God says,
Get up and eat.
get up, eat, and go. You got a job to do. So God is the one driving the story, sometimes in spite of Elijah. Now, last week, as we come close to the end of Kings, so we've got Elijah, king of Israel. What happens with Elijah? Not Elijah, because we didn't even talk about him last week. What happens to Ahab?
He's killed.
Okay, he dies. And what is the context in which Ahab dies? You remember that?
Is he the one that got shot by an arrow? No.
Yes, he is. Good. Because remember that fighting the Arameans. Fighting the Arameans, which are causing all kinds of problems. But he's not fighting alone. He's fighting with, who's fighting beside him? Jehoshaphat from Judah. So we got Ahab from Israel, Jehoshaphat from Judah. They're fighting the Arameans. But we know, because another prophet, unnamed, has said to Ahab, you ain't going to make it. You ain't going to make it. And Ahab decides, and we know in the story, because the king of Aram has said to his soldiers, don't worry about killing the people from the army of Israel. Don't worry about that. The one you need to kill is the king, Ahab. And so Ahab knows this. And so Ahab does what every brave king would do. He says to his brother king,
You go out.
yeah, you dress like a king, I'm going to dress like a regular soldier. And Jehoshaphat says, why? Ahab says, because you look so darn good. You look so darn good. So Jehoshaphat is out there. He's dressed like a king. They start chasing him, remember? And he's running because they're trying to kill him. He don't know why. They're gunning for him. But what happens to Ahab?
He ends
He's the
up.
one that gets killed.
Yeah.
Hits right between the plates. And he ends up being mortally wounded, but he doesn't die right away. Remember, they prop him up in the chariot, and there's blood everywhere. And why is it significant? They bring him back to Samaria, which is the capital, after the battle, and he dies. And what happens to his bloody chariot?
They wash it out, but the animals.
Yes. Prostitutes bathe in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. But dogs lick it.
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing. Dogs licking your blood. That's not good. So anyway, we've got Ahab is now dead. Now, what do we know about Ahab's line? Because he's the son of Omri, and what is his moral position? What does he do in the sight of God? Ahab. Evil. He does evil in the sight of God. And we already know that one of the things God said to Elijah is, you're going to anoint, I've got 3 things that I want you to do. One of them is to anoint Jehu to be king of Israel, and he's not in the line. So the line of Omri, Ahab, is going to end. We know that dynasty is going to be over, because the writer tells us they do evil in the sight of God, which for the writer always means what? Doing evil in the sight of God always means
God's gonna make them pay.
It's going to make them pay worshiping idols. It isn't being cruel to people. It isn't murdering. It isn't committing adultery. It isn't violating the law. That's not what it means. You're worshiping other gods. That's doing evil in the sight of God, or allowing the worship of other gods. Okay, so this is it. Now, we've got Jehoshaphat. And as we approach what we're looking at today, and it's chapter 22 of 1 Kings. Chapter 22 of 1 Kings in your Bible. And 1 Kings is right before 2 Kings. Yeah. Okay, so we're at...
Is that a trick question?
Yeah, it is. It's an attempt at humor. And usually, if Debbie were here, this is when she would say, Ed, you're not nearly as funny as you think you are. So,
Tell me that order again.
shampoo. Shampoo. Yes. And I'm not even sure shampoo and conditioner.
Were
You know.
Before the shampoo or
I am.
after
I'm
the
above the
shampoo?
shampoo.
She's above
I'm above the shampoo.
Yeah.
I am. I can tell the shampoo what to do.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I'm glad for
Yeah,
you.
I am. It makes me feel good. So that's the life I've lived. I don't want to burden you with that. So anyway, so we're at chapter 22, verse 41. Because Ahab is dead and his son is now king. And when we look at chapter 22, verse 41, we see something that the writer has done before. Because we've got two countries he's writing about, right? Israel and Judah. And what has he done? And we're going to see him continue to do it. What does the writer do since he's dealing with two countries? He does, what is he doing in verse 41 of 1 Kings 20?
Reigns over Judah.
Okay, he shifts. He goes from king to king, which sometimes is confusing because he'll say, Jehoshaphat becomes king in the 12th year of the reign of King Ahab, and then it'll go back and King Azaz becomes, king in the 14th year of the reign of Jehoshaphat. So he goes back and forth between the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. Now that's not going to last forever. We're going to see that's going to end, in fact, fairly soon. But that's what the writer does, so he covers both. Now, like I said before, the two things about the king. Usually when the king is doing right in the sight of God, things go well for his people. So the country is sort of judged by the nature of the king. The other thing that is consistent is there will never be a good king in Israel. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. They may do, Ahab did. Last week we talked about him doing something that actually showed kind of faith, turning to God. But they are never going to be good, ever. Because they can't worship in Jerusalem. They can't do worship in the place God wants them to worship. Therefore, they are never going to be good. They're always going to do evil in the sight of the Lord. That's consistent. All right, so here we've got Jehoshaphat, king of Israel, which means his great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy is who? David. He's in the line of David, right? Line of Solomon. So he is part of that dynasty. He is king. Interesting because he's already been introduced into the story, right? When he was fighting with Ahab. So the writer's kind of going back to describe him a little bit. How is he described? How is Jehoshaphat described? How does the writer describe him?
He was doing right.
He's doing right in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, which means if he's doing right in the eyes of the Lord, what does that mean? Worshiping God, but
he wasn't leading his people.
Okay, what's happening? What is he allowing to happen?
He's allowing them to burn incense to the false gods.
Okay, the high places, they still got sacrifices to the high places. Now, why would the people do both? Why would they do that? Why wouldn't the people worship the Lord God? Why are they still worshiping at the high places?
Is it, I don't know, does it give them something physical?
Okay, good. I think that's part of it. Remember, we're talking about a time when you've got the gods they worship are primarily agricultural gods. They're gods of storm. They're gods of fertility. That's what they do. Man, if I'm a farmer and I want my crops
Yes.
to grow, and I am in a pre-rational world, so I don't understand fertilizer, although I'm not stupid. I know certain things work, certain things don't. But this is a mysterious world where supernatural things are affecting everything, and I want my crops to grow. What am I going to do? I'm going to worship a God that says, my job is to make crops grow. And if you get on my right side, your crops are going to grow. And I'll talk to the guy who's a God of the storms. And if you get on his right side, then you won't have hail. He won't send hail. So these are agricultural gods. They aren't gods that reign over all things. These are very specific gods to control this mysterious world in which they live. And that's why this was allowed to happen, even though they're worshiping God the way they're supposed to in the temple. Okay.
So Jehoshaphat was allowing that to make his life easier.
To make his life easy, yes, because as a farmer, man, I need all the help I can get. And if
God is a jealous God.
well, that's right, because you don't tolerate that worship. So that becomes the problem. Yeah, that's the problem. Okay, so he's a righteous guy. Jehoshaphat's a good guy. And as a sign of his general goodness, he allows this to happen. It's sort of like if somebody has a good luck charm. Coming to church and have a good luck charm. I carry a rabbit's foot. And the preacher's saying, you've got to get rid of that because that shows idolatry. Would most preachers do that? No. And I carry the knife, my little pen knife my grandfather had, and I just feel close to him. That's idolatry. You got to get rid of that. How would you feel if a preacher did that?
You wouldn't stay with them.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't stay in the church, right? But that's kind of what's happening here. So Jehoshaphat can be a good guy, and a righteous guy. He is just not going to tell these farmers that they can't sacrifice to these agricultural gods anymore to make the crops grow. You got to trust the Lord. He isn't going to do that, but he does do something that's going to clean up the temple. And what does he do to clean up the temple? That is a good thing. What does he send out of the temple? The male prostitutes. And why would, and I'll tell you, prostitutes are solidly associated with ancient temples and ancient religions. Why would prostitutes be connected to ancient religions? Why would prostitutes be sort of intertwined in these ancient religions that I just described? Life. These are agricultural gods. It involves producing life. And so that becomes part of, worship.
Now, with the male, just out of curiosity, were the male prostitutes looked down on as badly as the women prostitutes?
Are they looked down on more strictly than the female? Yes. That's a whole nother that I don't want to get into.
Yeah.
But we can sometime. That's why male homosexuality is such a big deal. It's not a big deal. That's why it's mentioned in the Old Testament. Because we're also talking about a time when population is stable. Therefore, you needed procreation to survive. Mm-hmm. And if you had a large homosexual population, you're not going to procreate because male homosexuals don't have kids.
Yeah.
Therefore, all female either. So they become really dangerous, not only in the sight of God, but it becomes dangerous socially because your society is going to collapse. It's not going to produce enough kids.
Yeah.
So and that's why polygamy was allowed for men, but not for women. Yeah. Because a man could have 5 women pregnant at the same time, but a woman can only be pregnant by 1 man. And so there was a tolerance towards polygamy because you needed as many children being produced in a society for a society to survive. So that's just life in the ancient world. because the infant mortality rate was
But
so
there's still,
incredibly
there's
high.
still that, well, I don't know how much of it goes on now, but the Mormons still,
Yeah, it's,
you know.
and that's why we could question whether the
Yeah.
world is the same as it was then.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, so he cleans this out, which is sort of the agricultural idea creeping into the temple where it doesn't belong. He gets rid of that. Then there's this story about building ships. What's this saying with Jehoshaphat building ships?
trading ships to go.
Yeah, trading ships, but what happens to the trading ships?
They were wrecked.
They wreck, and who offers to help?
Azariah?
Ahaziah. Ahaziah, who's king of Israel, but Jehoshaphat says, no, and it just shows, that's another sign of his righteousness. He's not going to work with this unrighteous king. And then Jehoshaphat does what?
Rested.
He
Rested with his
rested with his father. Now, again, just to file away way in the back of your head, this idea of sleep for the Jews is synonymous with death. Sleep is often used as an image of death because when this is written, there's this idea we're getting this idea of resurrection, that there'll be life after death, but it's going to be as a result of a resurrection of the dead. So when you die, the idea isn't that your soul goes somewhere else, but you sleep until God says,
wake up.
and you wake up, and that's the resurrection. So that's why you see sleep so much used, and Paul uses that. I mean, that's what Paul uses in 1 Corinthians, the idea that we fall asleep, to those who have fallen asleep. Well, that's how Jews view death. It's like sleep until God wakes you up. Okay, so anyway, that's the situation. Jehoshaphat, good guy, dead. Not a surprise. People in Judah, kings of Judah, sometimes are good, sometimes are bad. But Ahab has a son, and his son's name is Ahaziah. And what does the narrator say about Ahaziah? No good. He does things that are evil in the sight of the Lord, just like his mommy and daddy, because he worships Baal, and by the way, Baal is a storm god. That's a mountain god, god of the storms. And he also follows in the footsteps of Jeroboam, which is the first king of Israel. Remember, who set up the calves in the calf, one in Dan and one in Bethel. Okay, so he ends up, and we know he's not. He's paying consequences for his lack of righteousness, right? Because first the writer tells us who rebels against him, Ahaziah. Moab rebels, in the beginning of, now we've moved into 2 Kings, now we've made that transition to 2 Kings, right at the beginning, who rebels? Moab rebels against Israel, because Israel's been controlling Moab. And what happens to Ahaziah?
Falls off the balcony.
He's at his palace, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens to him?
Falls through a roof.
He falls. He falls through a lattice, right? And he is in Samaria, and Samaria is not a country, it's a city. And what happens to him?
He's hurt.
He's hurt. He's injured. And so, since he's injured, he has his servants do what?
Go ask Beelzebub to cure him.
Yes, go to Baal. Go to Baal and see if he will cure me. Okay? So what happens when he tells his servants, check out Baal, go to the Baal church, see what Baal has to say about my injuries. And who hears about it?
Question.
Yeah.
Just in my Bible, the interpretation is Beelzebub, not Baal. Why would the writer use Beelzebub and not continue to use Baal?
Well,
What
because
is the difference between the two words? They're the same evil.
they actually refer to slightly different deities.
Beelzebub is
Again one of these. It's connected to Baal, but it might have a slightly different function. I don't know what that function is, but it's a slightly different deity.
So I was always I could be wrong.
Yes,
but
I know where you're going.
Okay. That was my curiosity.
Yes, yeah, Beelzebub is often associated with Satan, which is not a shocker that later it's going to be associated with an ancient god. But here it's not. He isn't saying go to a Satan worshiper. It's going to a slightly different deity that may be a deity that controls physical health,
So that's
as
why
opposed
I was
to
curious
storms.
as why the author used it.
Well, I'd have to check the Hebrew
Okay.
to make sure, because I'm guessing that it's a slightly different
Pastor
deity.
Ed will check.
I'll check on the word in Hebrew, because usually it has a meaning in Hebrew. Yeah, we see it in other places like El Shaddai or El Elyon, which is associated with the Jews, but they have slightly different nuances. Okay, all right. So anyway, check on this God, foreign God, and who hears about it? Who hears that he is sent? Elijah. And again, he's identified because this story doesn't seem connected with the other Elijah stories. It doesn't say, oh yeah, Elijah has been living here since da-da-da-da-da. It's like this is a distinct story having to do with Elijah. Remember, the writer of the Kings, books of the Kings and Samuel, are putting together stories that are coming from different sources and putting those stories into a narrative. And so this would seem to be a story that may have stood on its own, that he's just working into his narrative. And what is Elijah's response? Well, it's not Elijah's response. Who talks to Elijah? Okay, the Lord. And remember, that's Lord with all caps, which means it's that 4-letter name for God that we're not supposed to say out loud. So that's what's written there, but it's translated in most of the translations Lord, but in all caps, or maybe small caps. But so the Lord God of Israel says to Elijah what?
The bed he's lying on, he will never get up out of.
Okay, he's never going to get out of bed because
He'll surely die.
he's going to die. But why? What is the reason? What reason does the Lord tell Elijah?
Because you're going
to say to him,
he goes to Bezalel.
Yeah. Why aren't you consulting the Lord God? Why aren't you consulting me? You're going to this, other God.
Yeah.
Are there no other? Is the Lord no longer in Israel? Is this the only God in Israel now? And so the messengers, he says this, the messengers go to the king, right? And what do they tell the king?
They tell him that they met Elijah, and they told him that what he had said about, isn't there a God in Israel that you can pray to? Why are you praying to Beelzebub?
Yeah, that's right.
Or Baal? Yeah.
And when the guys come back, and the king says, Ahaziah says, well, tell me about the guy. You met a guy that tells you that? Tell me about, describe him. He is one hairy guy.
Yeah.
He's a hairy guy with a leather belt around his waist called Elijah. Okay? So, what does the king do? Okay, he sends out
50 guys.
50 guys. A captain, a commander with 50 guys. And where do they go? They go to Elijah, right? So he sends out these 50 guys, maybe to arrest him, we don't know. But he sends the 50 guys and the captain to Elijah. And what do the 50 guys want?
To know where the prophet went.
Well, they find him, right? Mm-hmm. They find the prophet. What do they say to the prophet when they find him?
Come down.
Yeah, come down with us. We're going to take you to see the king. And Elijah says,
if I be a man of God, let God send fire down from heaven.
Okay. If I represent the Lord God, God's going to send fire down from heaven. Now, have we seen Elijah do that in this narrative before?
Yeah.
I did. When the prophets of Baal, when they had that contest on the mountain and, he calls the fire and it burns up the sacrifice. So we have seen fire from heaven before. And he says, if I'm a man of God, I'm going to send fire from heaven and it's going to singe you.
Consume you.
It is going to consume you. Right? And what happens?
That's what it does.
Oops, we've got 51 ashes. Little briquettes left, right? Yes.
Just burning your barbecue.
Not pleasant. Not very pleasant, right?
No.
It comes down and consumes it. All right, so naturally the king sends another 50 with another captain. And what happens?
Same thing.
Same thing. And so, gone. So what does the king do? Sends another group. Now, I'm guessing he's not getting volunteers anymore. These are, people aren't saying, oh boy, I want to go on this mission. This is good. In fact, with the third group, what does the commander, and again, 3 numbers are really important in the ancient world. 3 is a perfect number, and so 3 is that's big important. So what does the third guy, the third captain with his 50 guys, what does he do?
Basically asks Elijah not to send them.
Yeah, please, Elijah, I know what's happened.
Yeah.
Please don't
fire me up.
bring down fire from heaven. I've heard this is bad. And what does Elijah do?
Goes down with them.
He says, okay, I'll come with you. And he does. And so Elijah comes down, and when he meets the king, what does Elijah say?
Told him what the Lord said.
Same thing. We've heard the same thing now. Mm-hmm. And but the key is, this is something coming from God. This is coming from the Lord, because this is what?
What the Lord wants.
What the Lord wants. This is God's story. And then if the Lord says it's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so what happens to Ahaziah?
Dies.
He dies. Not only, he didn't get out of bed, he ends up dying. And of course, if anybody here wants to read more about what happens in Ahaziah's reign, they should do what?
Find the book.
Find the annals of the kings of Israel and read about it. And where might you find that book?
We're searching.
Don't know. Don't know. It's not anything that we know about, but it's mentioned here over and over again. And so the story of Ahaziah is done. Now Ahaziah's father was who? Who was Ahaziah's father?
Jehoshaphat.
No, it wasn't Jehoshaphat. It was Ahab. Who was his mom? Jezebel. So Ahaziah was still talking about Ahab and Jezebel. And they ruled what country? Israel, not Judah. Judah is Jehoshaphat, right? Mm-hmm. Now, way back when we were in Kings, and this was back maybe 2-3 weeks ago, remember the Lord gave Elijah 3 jobs to do. I got 3 jobs. This is after, Elijah was in the crevice and saw God pass. And not in the, storm, and not in the fire, but in the still small, in the sound of silence. And, gives him a 3-part assignment. And do you remember what the assignment was? He was going to do 3 things. He's going to anoint a new king for Aram. He's going to anoint a new king for Israel, and he's going to anoint somebody else. A prophet. And who was the prophet? Elisha. And in fact, to this point in the story, that's the only thing Elisha's done. All he's done of those 3, that checklist, is he has anointed Elisha as a prophet. Okay. Chapter 2. So we're going to take kind of a break with these kings. Because in chapter 2, the writer tells us exactly what's going to happen in the story that follows. What does the writer tell us is going to happen in what follows? What do we expect to see in chapter 2 of 2 Kings?
The Lord is going to take Elijah in a whirlwind.
The Lord is going to take Elijah in a whirlwind. Now, remember, we're reading something a person has written to be understood. And he's not just writing down facts. So the writer is telling us, like any good writer, now we're taking a break from the kings. This story that follows is going to be about Elijah being taken away. Okay? So we've got Elijah is traveling with Elisha. And remember, we haven't talked about Elisha for quite a while. You know, after, Elijah anointed him as a prophet, and they were sort of traveling together, we didn't see Elisha. So this is the next time he appears, that's why I say the story we just saw about Elijah, and Ahaziah, would seem to be independent because it doesn't mention Elisha. Yeah, Elijah was there with Elisha. I mean, he's not mentioned in that at
I think
all.
Elijah, I picture it as Elijah's his mentor, and he's
Right.
going along with him, and
Right.
I mean, he may be anointed the prophet, but he's seeing the prophet one-on-one.
Right.
What he
And
did.
that's the impression we get when he's anointed, because they go and travel together.
Right.
Because remember, Elisha's got behind these ox plowing the field, and Elijah says, you got to leave these ox behind. You're going to follow me. You're going to come with me. And he does. He leaves back the oxen behind, and he follows. So anyway, we're picking up now on that story again. So we've got Elijah, and Elisha. And what does Elijah want from Elisha? J versus S. What does Elijah want from Elisha? And he asks this several times in this
He asked
story.
him to pray for him, because the Lord sends him to Bethel.
Okay, he's going to Bethel, right? And understand, all of this is taking place in a very small area, north of Jerusalem, in the kingdom of Israel. So they're not in Judah, they're in Israel, but really close to the border, really, really close, right on the edge. Okay, and Elijah says to Elisha, what? As he's going to Bethel.
Told him not to.
Don't go. Yeah, don't go. Stay here. I need to go to Bethel. And Elisha says,
I will not leave you.
no, I'm not going to leave you. And so what happens? They both go. And as they're going to Bethel, we're going to see another group that's going to be a constant in this story, and we'll talk about why. As they're going to Bethel, and Bethel is, anytime you see El in any name, God is part of the name, because El is Hebrew word for God. And so Bethel means house of God. That's what it means. That's what the word means. The name of the city is. Okay, so going to Bethel, who do they meet?
Prophets.
They meet a bunch of prophets, okay? And what do these prophets say?
Don't you know that God's going to take away your master?
Okay, so they're saying it to Elisha, right? And they're going to say, today your master's going to be gone. And Elisha says,
I know.
yeah, I know that. Okay, maybe that explains why earlier when Elijah said to Elisha,
To stay.
stay here, Elisha said,
No.
no, I'm going with
He
you.
wanted to be with
Okay,
him,
wants to be with him at the end. Okay, so what does Elijah say to Elisha? Because they're going to Bethel, right?
Yeah.
And what does he say to him?
He
then?
said he knew.
Okay, well, Elisha says, I know. He says it to the prophets. Now Elijah has this same conversation with Elisha. Lord have mercy. If one could have been named Bill, it would have been so much easier.
Yes.
What does Elijah say to his young protege?
He also tells them to stay in Bethel. Tarry here while I go into Jericho.
Okay, I'm going to go to Jericho.
Yes.
And I want you to stay here. Now the prophets have already said, this group of prophets have already said, understand your master's going to be gone. And Elisha says, I know. Elijah again says to him, now we're in Bethel. I'm going to go to Jericho, right? And his protege says,
I'm going with you.
no, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to go with you. Okay, so what do?
They go.
They go, and what do the prophets say?
Same thing.
He's good. This is it. He's going to be taken from you. And the protege says,
I know.
yeah, I know. So then what does Elijah say to his young friend?
Stay here.
Stay here. Because now I'm going to do what?
Go to Jordan.
I'm going to go to the Jordan. Okay? And because the Lord has sent me to the Jordan. And what does Elisha say to his mentor?
I will not leave
Same thing.
I will
Again,
not leave you.
how many times does this happen?
3.
3, things happen in 3 years.
Yes.
That's the way it goes. So they are now heading to the Jordan, right? And they are not going alone.
Yeah, 50
Who's going to 50 prophets? This company of prophets, 50 of them following. But there's some distance away as they're moving towards the Jordan. And when they get to the Jordan River, what does Elijah do?
He rolls up his cloak and hits the water.
Okay, he's got his little cloak, mantle, that's what it is, sort of a wrap, almost like a poncho that he has. And so he rolls it up and he does what with it?
Hits the water.
Okay, he hits the water. And what happens when he hits the water?
Divided.
Oh, the water's divided.
Just like that.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Shelley, you were right there. I'm experiencing deja vu all over again. When has this sort of thing happened before?
When Moses divided the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Red Sea, Charlton Heston dividing the
Yes.
Red Sea. I can close my eyes and see it.
Yep.
When else did this happen in the Jordan?
Huh?
When did this happen with the Jordan River? Ooh, excellent question. Y'all know.
When they
I
were
know
going
you
to the
know.
promised land?
Huh?
When they were going to the promised land?
Yes, when Joshua's there and he's getting ready to go through the promised land, remember he's got the ark, and when they approach the water in the Jordan, well, it actually doesn't divide, it piles up. It piles up, so the river stops flowing. So the river stops flowing and they pass on dry land. Remember they put 12 stones
yeah.
in the middle of the riverbed
Which are still there.
to show that the writer says, and by the way, if you ever do some scuba diving, you'll find those stones because they're still there. Okay, so he hits the Jordan. Now, the fact that the river divides, it can't be an accident that we're talking about a river dividing. What as the reader, what do we expect? I mean, we got Moses going through the Red Sea, we got Joshua leading the people into the promised land. This is a big deal, the dividing. What are we going to expect to see coming after this? We're going to expect something, a miracle. We're going to expect something pretty spectacular.
Because God brings you to the other side to seek Him. He's got a plan, just not just
This is a miraculous thing. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
So we're kind of prepared. Also, the fact that he did it with his mantle, with this cloak, this poncho, that he did it, that may have an important role in the story too. So what do they end up doing?
Crossing.
They cross over on the dry land, and what does Elijah say to his protege?
Tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you.
Okay. Tell me what I can do for you. And what does Elisha want? How does he respond?
He wants a double portion of the Spirit.
Double portion of the Spirit. Now, why is that significant?
That's huge.
That it's a lot. What makes that particularly interesting that he wants double share?
Firstborn son.
Yes! That's what the firstborn son got.
Gotcha.
When a man had property and he had 4 sons, the firstborn son got a double share. He divided into 5 portions, and the oldest would get double the rest. And so that what Elisha is asking is the portion that would go to the firstborn, a double share. So, in other words, he's not only asking for the Spirit, he's asking for what? As the firstborn. He wants to follow Elijah. He wants to do what Elijah did.
Yeah.
He wants to be the first son, be treated like the eldest son. Okay, so that's what, and what does Elijah say in response? So that's, Elisha says, in other words, treat me like your own son. So when you're going, I will follow in your name, in your footsteps. I'm going to follow in your footsteps. What does Elijah say?
It says, if you see me when I am taken,
Okay,
it'll be yours.
because this isn't mine to
Give.
to give.
Yeah.
This isn't,
Only God can
I
give
can't
the
do it
Spirit.
because this is God working. So if you see this, if God allows you to see me leave, then you are going to follow me. You are going to do what I did.
God will give you
Which
that.
becomes really significant because remember, there are loose ends. Because Elijah has only done one of the three things God told him to do. Only one of them he's done. He's still got 2 kings to anoint, and he ain't done it yet. So if Elisha is going to follow as a son, then Elisha can do what God assigned
Correct.
to Elijah. Okay? So it would be that kind of continuity. All right. So if you see this, if the Lord lets you see it, then that's going to be your position. And what happens? Okay, all of a sudden, what occurs there?
Chariot of fire.
Ooh, a chariot of fire and horses of fire come and
Separates them.
yes, separates them, and there's a whirlwind, and what happens?
Elijah went up to heaven.
Okay, Elijah is taken up into heaven. And what does Elisha cry out?
My father, yeah, my father.
Okay, which is very appropriate because he is seeing exactly what he needed to see in order to be
The firstborn.
the firstborn, to be Elijah's son. So, calling father, it seems very, very appropriate. So he sees what he is supposed to see. Okay. Now, this Elijah being taken up into heaven, which means what about Elijah? What does this mean about Elijah that is really distinct? In fact, to this point in the story, there's only one other person
Besides, yeah.
that would apply, to which this would apply.
Enoch.
Enoch, right. What makes Enoch and Elijah similar?
Because they didn't die.
They didn't die. Elijah and Enoch, and the Enoch is way back in Genesis, didn't die. Now, this becomes really, really important later. Not in this story, because this story is not going to be important at all. Through the books of the Kings, it's not going to be important. But people later are going to notice this. And how are they going to start seeing? How do you think they're going to start seeing Elijah? And this is pertinent for us as we look at the New Testament. How are these folks who know this story, how are they going to start seeing Elijah? And actually, they do the same thing with Enoch. And even that's in the New Testament.
Sometimes they bow down. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, Elijah's going to play an interesting role in Judaism, and so will, like I said, so will Enoch to a lesser extent, but even in Christianity. Because the idea, since Elijah never died, he was taken up to be with God, ancient people, Jews, started to expect at the end, when the world was about to end, Elijah was going to reappear.
Yeah.
That Elijah was going to reappear. Because he never died.
Yeah.
So it's not like the only way you could reappear if you died is to be raised, which is the resurrection of the dead, and that's a big process. Everybody's involved in that. But Elijah didn't die. So Elijah could come back before the resurrection of the dead because he never died. And that's why when you look at the New Testament, you run into some interesting things. Like when Jesus is talking to his disciples at Caesarea Philippi, and he asks them, who do people say that I am? And one of the people that they say he is Elijah. Because people are saying Jesus is Elijah come down, which means the resurrection is going to happen, right? That's why in the New Testament, in fact, if we look at not John, because John's different, the Gospel of John, but in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who is going to be identified as Elijah?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. John the Baptist is going to be identified as Elijah because he was the one that came back to announce really the resurrection of the dead. He was the one that's going to announce the end of the world. And in the Gospels, we are living in the end now. Now, it's been 2,000 years, but that's how the Gospel is presenting it. So John the Baptist is Elijah come back. Now, in the Gospel of John, they ask John the Baptist, are you Elijah? And John the Baptist says, no, I am not. Because how John is presented in the Gospel of John is a little different than how he's presented in the other three. But, so, the other time Elijah shows up in the New Testament is in the Gospels. You remember another time? So he's associated with the end of the world. He's associated, some people associated with Jesus. The Gospel writers, at least Matthew, Mark, and Luke, associated with John the Baptist. There's another story where Elijah plays a role. Not the ascension, but you're really close. Transfiguration. When Jesus is on the mountain, remember Transfiguration. And all of a sudden, Jesus is there with Moses and Elijah. And Moses, because in Deuteronomy talks about a prophet like Moses coming before the end. And Elijah, this one that they expected. So the Transfiguration takes on this we're coming to the end. And the resurrection of the dead is that's the end. That's what's going to happen at the end. The dead will be raised. And so the Transfiguration has all this imagery, but Elijah plays a part. And in fact, it's really interesting. In the Gospel of Mark, when they describe the Transfiguration, as opposed to Luke and Matthew, and it doesn't appear in John. But in Mark, the writer says, these two people appear. He says they are Elijah and Moses. If you look at Matthew and Luke, it's Moses and Elijah. The order is changed. Because Mark is far more focused on this is the end. When Jesus is crucified, we are really close to the end. And the other evangelists don't have that same sense. So Moses becomes far more important than Elijah. But for Mark, Elijah's the one you look at. Elijah's the important one. Really, really, really interesting. And like I said, even Enoch, though, is mentioned. But you got to look at 2 Peter that mentions Enoch. Again, the one who is supposed to come back. And there are ancient writings with Elijah too, in the Old Testament that's not part of our Old Testament, that are written, that's a book of Enoch, that's in the Roman Catholic, because it's in the Greek translation, and it's a vision of the future. Well, who better to tell you about the future than the one who didn't die? I mean, he can listen to what God says. So it's a vision that Enoch has about what's going to occur later. Anyway, so he's taken up to heaven, right? Mm-hmm. And Elisha knows it. And what does Elisha pick up? Which is really important.
What does Elijah?
He picks up the poncho that's on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. And why is that so important?
Picked up the mantle.
Picked up the mantle. That's what we, picking up the mantle.
Yep.
That's that saying, I'm going to pick up the mantle and do what my granddad did. That's what he did. He picks up the mantle, and we know he has the same authority that Elijah had, because he picks up the mantle and does what with it? Strikes the water, and what happens to the water?
Divides.
Boom, it divides. So what do we now know about Elisha,
He's received the Spirit.
he has
Spirit.
received the inheritance. He is now the direct heir of
Elisha.
Elijah. And who does he meet?
The company of prophets,
He meets a company of prophets, and what do?
they
Do?
realize that too.
They realize that too. Why is that so important for the writer to include? That the company of prophets understand that Elijah has
The power.
this power. Why is that important for the writer to mention? What does that do for the story?
God is still there.
God is still in control, and we, the reader, know what happened is
God's work.
it's God's work in His work. Because now we've got what? Witnesses. Now we got witnesses. You
So
know.
before we go too far from
Yeah.
it, when he cried out, my father, the second half of that, the chariots and horsemen of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sentence standing on its own. What's the purpose? I mean, that's what he saw, but why does he make that statement after my father, the chariots in heaven of Israel?
Why do you think? Because remember, we're looking at not just, and what's interesting is that the writer, the narrator is writing this, right? Mm-hmm. But according to how it's described, how many people are saying that?
Just him.
Just him. So it's not like behind a rock there's a reporter saying, okay, now what did he say? Yeah, writing it down. So there's nobody to hear it, right? So what he's writing is a narrative, about what's occurring. Why would it be so important and of course I think, now it could be a deeper meaning, I don't know. But I think the reason is here is actually relatively mundane. Why would it be significant in what the writer has established for Elisha to say the chariot of fire and or the chariots of Israel and its horsemen? Why would that be significant that the writer say, this is what Elisha said?
Because it's what Elijah saw.
What's that?
Because he saw it.
Bingo.
It's
I mean, there's no
I saw it.
question that Elisha saw it. Because remember, that's what Elijah said. If you see this, then you know you are my heir. And by Elisha saying this, there's no question, and what he's describing is what the writer told us happened. There's no question that Elisha what? Saw it. That Elijah saw what happened. If he hadn't put that in, conceivably, one could say, this happened,
I
but
didn't see it.
Elisha didn't. That's right, that Elisha never saw it. This happened, and we, the reader, in a sense, one of the things I've said before, right when we were looking at Genesis, and this is the perspective, and whenever you read the Bible, including certainly the New Testament, but Old Testament as well, the writer doesn't want you as part of the story. He does not want you to be part of the story. He wants you to be looking down on the story. Because the writer will tell us things that the people in the story don't know. In the New Testament, all over the place, we know motivations. We know what people are thinking, right? Well, if you were in the story,
You wouldn't
you
know.
don't know that. You don't know that. How would you know it? You're in the story.
Yeah.
We know it. Therefore, we are not supposed to be in the story. We're looking at the story. We are looking from whose perspective? We are looking from God's perspective.
So then why Israel and not Judah? I guess that was my question. Why did he single out the chariots and horsemen of Israel? Is there any
Well,
significance to that?
that I could check on. I don't know that there is, but there might be. Other than that Israel is still associated with all of God's people, including Judah. That he's not talking about the nation of Israel, but rather the people of Israel, which would include Judah. That's what I think it probably is. It reflects the promise made. Maybe it's the promise made to Israel. Because remember, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So maybe it's not even a reference to a nation or people. It could be a reference to Jacob, who is Israel. That it could be. I don't know. I can see this, though, functioning in the story as the writer saying to us, the reader, don't have any illusions that Elisha didn't see what he saw, because that's the first thing he said. And not only did he say it, he described it. He told it to somebody else, which establishes for us that Elisha is now the man. He is now the prophet, right? Now, if he is the prophet and he has the mantle, he has the poncho that seems to have power. Now, if this is true, what would we expect before Elisha? Because we got loose threads, right? Before Elisha starts doing any real work, what might the writer want to do before Elisha starts doing important things? I mean, Elisha says, I saw the chariot. Boy, I saw it right now. I see it going up. I described it to somebody else. I had the mantle tap the water, divided just like Elijah. That's what Elijah did. What would we expect the writer, if the writer wants to establish Elisha's authority, what might we expect him to do before we get back to the main thread of the story? Because
There's
again,
more witnesses in there. He's got the 50 people on the outside looking down, seeing Elijah smoke the waters, and they said, truly, he has the spirit of Elijah. Does breath on Elisha.
okay, so we've got that,
Yeah.
done. What else? As soon as Elisha does this, the writer of the story, we're into another one, right? He brings us right into another story about Elisha, right? In verse 19. Where do we go in verse 19? So he's told the prophets. What do we have in verse 19? Now, I'll guarantee you, this story has nothing to do with what follows. This is just dropped in here. But I think it serves a purpose. Okay, what about water?
They go to them and tell them that the water is bad.
Okay, goes to a town where the water's bad.
Yeah.
Now, not unlike a story, one in the Elijah stories. Remember, before Elijah starts doing the work he's supposed to do, which is kind of a confrontation with Ahab. Remember, there were some stories beforehand that we never go back to, that's never mentioned again. Remember the widow? That he asked for.
Water to well?
Yeah, he asked for water and food.
Oh, yeah.
And the widow says, I don't have any water or food, or they're famine. There's a famine in the land. I don't have much water. I've just got a son here, and I've got enough for us, and we'll have one last meal and then we're going to die. And Elijah says what? You give me
Bread.
You give me bread, and what's going to happen?
The jar won't be.
The jar won't be empty.
Yeah.
And the jug of oil won't run dry. You'll continue to have food. And what happens?
That happened.
Boom. After that, we got another story related to the same widow. Remember, her son dies,
Yes.
and Elijah
Heals him.
brings him back to life. So we got, and then Elijah's gone. And now we're dealing with the prophets of Baal, on the mountain. And we don't go back to that. Stories that do what? Establish Elijah's
No credibility.
credibility and his power from God, because this is still God's story. And we see the same thing happen with Elisha, because Elisha is in a city that has bad water. And what does Elisha do?
Tells him to bring a bowl of water to him and put salt in it.
So,
Yeah, he puts salt. Now, what makes the water bad? What is the cause of bad water?
The minerals underground.
Yes, it's the minerals. Particularly, what mineral is going to make the water bad?
Iron.
Iron?
Sulfur.
Salt. If water's got a high saline, you ain't going to be able to drink it, right? And it ain't going to cause your crops to grow. That was the old story about Rome, in Carthage. The last after the third Carthaginian War, Rome salted the ground in Carthage so nothing would ever grow. And so salt is bad. So if you got bad water, you don't say, I'll make it better. Bring me some
Salt.
Yeah, bring me some molten salt, and let me pour it in the water. That'll make it better. But that's what he does. And what happens to the water?
It gets better.
It gets better. So salt is going to, yes, she's my girl.
She wants down.
She
Chew
wants
her,
down.
chewy.
Oh, she's got something?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I didn't know she had some, I didn't see you give her that. Okay, well, then she did not want to be held by me.
It's okay.
Yeah, well.
She loves you anyway.
Yes, well, later I'll go home and look at the shampoo. Or maybe tell the shampoo to do some stuff.
There you go.
Wash the dog nicely.
Wash the dog. All right, so it doesn't, so Elisha has done that. And then we got another story, which may be the most important story in the entire Old Testament. Most important. Elisha is going down the road
When some youths were jeering at him.
yeah, making fun of him.
Go bald
And
head. That's what it says.
Don't take
Are
it
you saying that to me?
No, that's.
Oh, that's what it says in there. Oh, I thought you were saying that to me. Oh, I thought that, Shelley, that hurt my feelings.
No, I didn't do that.
Because if you said that to me, you know what I'd have to do?
No, what?
Call some she-bears out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens when they say, Baldy,
He brings out,
what does he do?
he puts a curse on them and brings a bear out.
Which is one of those really nice stories that kids don't learn about in Sunday school, about the bears coming out and mauling and eating these 42 boys.
You can have bears, or you can have dogs, and,
Doesn't matter,
Yeah,
yes. What is the point? Now, if we really want to play, gosh, we could interpret this to death in a lot of different ways. What is the point? Because I think the point is really simple. Elisha has authority. He has authority. Just like his spiritual daddy. He has authority. And so now the writer has given us the opportunity to move on in the story knowing that Elisha is going to do great things, including the 2 undone things that Elijah was assigned. Okay. Yeah, on Sunday, I'm going to preach this about bald-headed men and bears. So it'll be a good one. It'll be a good
Holler
one.
out the
Can I
answers.
just ask you a question about 16 through 18? They said to him that they wanted to go find his master, and he tells them not to go. What's going on there?
Okay, let me see. Oh yeah, that's kind of an odd little
Yeah,
story.
it is.
Because they want to, and even his response at the end.
Didn't I tell you not to go?
Now, why might he? And understand, when we're looking at scripture, we don't know what the writer had in mind all the time because we're not able to talk to him. So all we can do is sort of, if it makes sense. I was talking to a guy, in fact, it was yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, it was the day before. It was on Monday. I am what you call an Occam's razor guy. Now, I know we were talking about conspiracy theories. I told him I am an Occam's razor guy. Have you ever heard of Occam's razor? No. Occam was a man who lived a long time ago, 1,000 years ago. And a razor that's a principle. That's what the word means. So it's a principle that this guy named Occam, at least is associated with it. And it's a little slightly different than what I'm going to tell you, but it's sort of in the neighborhood. Occam's razor this is Occam's razor, Occam's principle. the most reasonable answer is usually the right one. The most reasonable answer is usually the right one. And therefore, the answer that makes the most sense is usually the right one.
So like he knew, he tried to tell them not to go,
Well,
but they wouldn't, they persisted.
I think what we've got here is, again, and that's how you interpret scripture, I think. As I look at this, I'm thinking, why is the writer putting this in here? Why is he putting this? What purpose does the writer have in putting this in? Well, to me, it seems to make sense that one of the reasons the writer puts it in is, again, to reinforce the idea that Elisha did what? Saw him leave. Mm-hmm. Saw him leave. Therefore, when they say, let's go look, let us go look for him, he's saying, don't do it, because look, what are they looking for?
Elijah.
They're looking for Elijah. They're looking for his body. They're looking for him.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's what he's looking for.
If you were there and that prophet told you, you seen him and you didn't see him, when
Correct.
you believe him?
You're doing too.
Yeah.
You're right. If two people go into a desert and one person comes back and he says, "Oh, yeah, I'm thinking of a husband and wife that don't get along real well, and they go both into the desert, and the wife comes back by herself, and they say, 'Where's your husband?' A chariot from heaven came down." and the police are going to say, "Oh, I'm an Occam's razor guy. That makes sense." Yeah, I think this is here to reinforce that idea.
I was just not missing master.
Yeah.
And it's Elijah's, that makes total sense to me now.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that's why. To me, that makes sense why it would be there. So anyway,
Yeah.
so we've got who's going to be the leader, the human leader in the story from this point. Elisha. So we don't have to worry about Ja or Sha anymore. We're just on the Sha. But whose story are we still working with?
God.
It is still God's story.
Yeah.
This is God driving the story. And next week we're going to look at 2 Kings 3:1 through 5:27, and it's going to be about Elisha and what Elisha does. And we kind of know what he's going to do. We know he's going to deal with Ahazel,
I'm sorry, 527.
king of Aram, and he's going to deal with Jehu, king of Israel.
Yeah.
We already know that because that's what Elijah was told on Mount Horeb. So that's what we'll see next week. Any questions?
Yep, mine too.
All right.
Okay, this is stupid, disrespectful, don't mean it to be, but is that where they got the jumping Jehoshaphat when people get yeah.
I'm gonna have to check that out. But, I'll tell you something. I don't
That was
think.
that name from, I don't know.
I don't think that's a bad question at all. And that's one that I can check on that.
Okay.
Because there's a reason why. And certainly Jehoshaphat is going to be is a good king. So it is a positive thing. It's not a negative.
So do you know why they call him Jumping Jehoshaphat? Why that?
That's what I got to find out.
Thank you asking that question. I've always wondered. I keep reading and I'm thinking, I don't see him jumping. I'm figuring it out. Thank you for asking.
Now we did see him running.
Yes.
Because he was running away from the guys that were trying to kill him last week, but we don't see him jumping. Maybe when he was running, he was also jumping. Could have been.
But people get upset and they'll go, jumping Jehoshaphat.
Well, ask that. You just don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's why if you're watching an old movie and you see Jezebel, man, you don't even need to see her character, presented.
Yeah.
As soon as you hear her name, you know exactly how she's going to be used.
Yeah.
And it ain't going to be good.
And they haven't stopped to this day saying you Jezebel, people do stuff, calling them names.
That wasn't anything you experienced. Nobody said,
No. It's amazing.
The other one is like Judas Priest.
Yeah.
I never could figure out, but I know now. I know now. But yeah, it's just amazing the verbiage that we use every day, that if you don't even know it, that comes from the Bible.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
There's all,
But I mean-
you know, I'll tell you somebody to talk to about
That's
that.
wonderful.
If you, who really knows those specific things, is talk to Dan Minnick. Because he used to teach a class of advanced students when librarian, eighth grade students who, you know, were high achievers and stuff. And one of the things he was able to do whatever he
Want a
wanted.
drink?
They just said, do it. Sort of philosophy kind of
Can I
thing.
let her out?
And he, one of the things he did, he told me, one of the units, or one of the lessons he did was had them research biblical allusions in modern language. And that's what he had his kids work on. You know, those jumping Jehoshaphat.
Because it made them think
You know.
for themselves. That's
Well,
a really good
and it also forced them to research. That's what he was really pushing them to research. So, anyway, so let's have a word of prayer and then jump in Jehoshaphat.
Now you're gonna be thinking of that all
No,
week.
I really want to
No,
know that.
no,
I want to know that answer.
No, I'm not going to be thinking of that. I'm going to be thinking of
You're going to Google it.
Jezebel.
Yeah.
Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together. Bless us as we go about our story, knowing that our story is also yours, because you are the one who's in control. Help us to see ourselves in relationship with you. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
See, that's what she was just doing.